How to quickly gain the trust of your networking connection. I'm Greg, I'm the introverted networker, and today I'm talking a little bit more about trust in networking. It's a topic I've been talking about in the past several episodes. It's come up a lot. Trust is the key to successful networking. Everything that's good about networking comes from a place of trust. When you trust the other person and when the other person trusts you, great things that can happen with networking. The opposite is if you don't trust the other person and you're connecting with them, it becomes very transactional. It becomes all of the things that people hate about networking. Feels salesy, feels awkward, comes off as impersonal. People don't like to do it because there's no trust. When you trust somebody, it's much easier to help them, for them to help you, and you're connecting for mutual benefit. But that all comes from trust. So how do we get trust? I mean, you can say it's foundational, but where does trust come from? And I've been reading a book by Stephen M.R. Covey. It's called The Speed of Trust. And it's a great book if you're interested in trust. And this is focused on helping organizations and individuals understand the power of trust, specifically in companies. So he talks about trust, and the reason it's called Speed of Trust is because where trust is high, speed is high, and costs are low. So in your company, if people trust each other, you can move quickly and you can save money and get better results. If trust is low, speed is low, and costs are high. That's the equation that he puts out in here. But he also talks about 13 behaviors that inspire trust, that people can work on and focus on to increase trust. And I want to talk about one of them because this is the one that he says is actually the most important. And it's not number one. But he says behavior number 11 is listen first. Listen first, speak last. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit because it goes into everything I talk about with networking, where I, in my third step of networking, talk about listening and giving. When you're in a networking conversation, you should always be listening first. And I've said that as long as I've been talking about networking, but way before I even read this book or even heard of this book. But it makes sense, right? I mean, it's just human nature. We all love to be listened to. So if you're going to be the person that's doing the listening, you're going to be someone people want to talk to. But he really breaks it down in this. And I think what's most powerful for me, and I'm actually going to read from this book because I want you to hear these words. They're really powerful in terms of the importance of listening. And we'll talk about how it goes to networking. But he says, when I have interviews or when people come up to me with questions after a program or presentation, I find that by far, listen first is the behavior I recommend most. It's the starting point in almost any situation. So often, the problems people have, both at work and at home, come because they don't really listen first. Perhaps this is why the cumulative data from our tens of thousands of trust surveys shows that listen first is the lowest rated, i.e. least practiced, of the 13 behaviors. Listening first is the least practiced of these 13 behaviors that he talks about to instill trust. So when you want to start focusing on growing trust in your organization, in your relationships, in your networking, listen first is the number one place to start. It's the least practiced. So if you're want to start somewhere, that's the place to start. And so it's interesting to me because that's what we talk about all the time with networking. And again, if you want to get to trust in networking, which you do, because that's where the mutual benefit is, that's where you can actually grow a relationship. That's where you can help each other. In order to get to that trust, you have to listen first. So what does that mean? It really just means what it says. I mean, listening first, I can't break it down and make it any easier than that, because let's see, let's go to some other part. There's another part here. Oh, here's what it was. Here's what he says, and he calls it making deposits. So I wanted to find this other piece of the book here. And it says, one of the huge benefits of Listen First is that it helps you learn how to build trust. Listening first helps you learn how to build trust. It helps you understand which behaviors make deposits in a particular trust account and which do not. So a trust account is, your sort of ledger of how much you trust other people and how much they trust you. Acting on this understanding results in greater speed because you're speaking and behaving in the same language as the person with whom you're trying to build the account. Again, listening is the key to building trust. So when we're talking about networking, very often it is tempting to start the conversation with your networking contact by talking about what you want or need. Very tempting. We're all meeting people and connecting with people because at some level we want the mutually beneficial side of the equation, right? Again, mutually beneficial both sides, but we want to benefit. And we want the other person to benefit too. But there's some benefit in talking to the other person. But until you can let that person talk and listen first and speak last, and really understand where they're coming from and be speaking the same language as them because they're telling you what they need, you are not going to get to trust. And you're not going to get to that mutually beneficial relationship. So that's how trust, that's what you can do. Because I've talked in previous episodes and issues of the network, of the Introverted Networker newsletter, about how foundational trust is to networking. Well, okay, that's the what. You need to have trust. This is the how you get trust. You get trust by listening. How do you listen? You ask the other person questions about themselves, and then you let them talk. And you continue to probe and ask them questions. It's sort of like you're doing the podcast, and you have the other person on, and you're just trying to get their point of view and find out what is interesting to them and what they need help with. And so that is where you want to start building trust. And again, this can be individually when you're growing your professional network, but this could also be if you're working in a job and you're trying to build trust with key stakeholders or partners or customers. It's not rocket science. None of this is a breakthrough. None of this is anything that we all don't know. We all know that we should be listening first. But going back to Stephen M.R. Covey's statement, it's the least practiced of the behaviors that he has in his book out of 13 papers. It's something we all know, and yet nobody does it. And so why do we not do it? I think it comes from the other part of step 3 in my sort of approach, is that giving piece of this. So we come into network thinking about, what am I going to get out of this? And we may not say that implicitly, but at some level, again, we're hoping to get something out of this. We come into it with that mindset. We immediately start talking, tell the other person what we need, instead of coming at it from a giving mindset, where we come into it saying, what can I give to this other person? What am I going to bring to the relationship that I can give to the other person? And that's when you get in that frame of mind, you can just listen because you've put your needs below the needs of the person you're talking to. And look, I get it. We all have our own needs. We all have things we want to do. But in these conversations, in these networking connection times, that's when you need to put the other person's needs ahead of yourself and come with a giving mindset. That will allow you to listen more, ask more questions, let the other person talk about themselves. And so then sometimes I have people say, well, what would happen if you had 2 people who are listening to your podcast or watching this video or reading your newsletter, and they both heard that they're supposed to listen first, and you got 2 people that are just trying to listen? Well, I find that that's probably highly unlikely. I mean, that would be great if there was enough people in the world that would meet up and get in that situation where they were both trying to listen to each other. But I think listening doesn't mean not talking at all, because, and again, it's in that chapter of the book, The Speed of Trust, where he talks about pretend listening, or just like acting like listening, but really thinking about when you can talk. So it's really more about how do you prompt the other person and ask them questions and then listen to their answers. And again, I've talked about asking better questions as a way to build trust, because you're allowing people to share more about themselves. So listening doesn't mean just sitting there and staring at them and not saying anything the whole time. It means actively listening, actively engaging, asking them questions, letting them answer without you interjecting your point of view. So again, if I got two of you people who are listening to this, and you get together and you're like, you can have a conversation where you're both listening to the other person, and you're both interested in the other person, and you're both demonstrating that you're going to try to listen first and speak last, even if practically speaking, somebody has to speak. So this is, again, part of why I talk about listening first, or listening and giving, as I put it, is that's more comfortable, especially for people who are introverted. People who are more introverted are going to feel better about asking questions and listening than trying to be the center of the conversation. We don't want to be the focal point of the conversation usually. Now, the other person may ask us questions and we answer those questions, and it feels good, because then it doesn't feel like we are bragging or boasting, or we're like dominating the conversation. So that's why the listen and give approach fits in with the Introverted Networkers 5-step approach to networking. But all of it goes back to, what are you going to do to build trust with your connection? And the fastest way you can do it, and the way you'll stand out from everybody else, is being the person who listens. There's a ton of research and thing about how to listen. I think we all intrinsically have a pretty good idea how to listen. We just have to remind ourselves that that's where we should place our focus. And like I said, when you come into this with a giving mindset, it makes it much easier to focus on that, because just being in that giving mindset allows you to give that person, and I always talk about giving them something, giving them an idea or recommendation or advice or an introduction or something like that. If you just come into it giving them space to talk, that's a gift in and of itself. If you come into a conversation giving your attention, which is your attention that you're listening with, that's a gift. Everybody these days wants one thing: attention. Everybody, we all crave attention. We live in a world of attention. We all want other people's attention. Fortunately, it's something we all have to give. While we all want it, we also have it. We all have attention we can give to other people. And when we give that attention, when we listen to what they're saying, when we try to help them out, that's when trust forms. That's when you build a trusting relationship. Whether it's between one person or with a lot of people at your company, that's where trust forms, and that's how you can get stuff done. That's where trust is high, speed is high, costs are low. So think about how you can listen in your networking conversations. Think about why you're doing it, again, to build this trust, and go out and really focus on that this week in your networking conversations, or any conversations you're having. Think about listening first, speaking last. And I guarantee you are going to feel, and the other person is going to feel, like they trust you more, and that you're going to have a much better relationship. Hopefully that helps. Try it out this week. Let me know how it goes. As always, please get in touch with me by email, LinkedIn. Leave me a comment here on this post. Like the podcast, like the video. It helps other people find it. So go out there, meet some interesting people, listen to them this week. Remember, always be connecting.